Welcome back to another Luanti tutorial. Today we are looking at how to make these, I struggle with what to call this, auto-updating form specs, I suppose. So here we have a form spec. Yes, this is a form spec. And as we see here, numbers automatically changing, and the little graph changes as well. We probably won't look at the graph aspect of things, but at least updating the text automatically. You know, we're not doing anything. Form specs are generally speaking static, and yeah, they don't really do anything outside of display something. So what we're going to look at is how to create one that does a little more than that. So for starters, we just have a simple node here. Doesn't do anything, doesn't show a form spec. And here is our starting code. So we just have a node, test node, with a tile that doesn't actually exist. Yeah, so that's cool. And then it has an oddly breakable by hand group. So first things first, we're going to need to give this a form spec, of course. And in order to interact with that, we are going to need an on right click, or you could use an on punch. I guess it really wouldn't matter which. And then on this, we do need to know the player name. So we're gonna have to get pass the variables of the position, the node, and the clicker. On right click also has item stack and pointed thing, but neither of those two are actually going to need anything for us. Then we're gonna wanna go ahead and get the player name. So we will do that with player name equals clicker get player name. And then we will need to show the form spec, but we're actually going to show the form spec with a function. So we will just go ahead and call this, I don't know, form spec wrapper. And then that will need the player name and the position, assuming that the form spec is updating with information that we are pulling from the node. We will need the position. Otherwise, we could just use the player's name. It really all depends on where the data is stored that is being used to update the form spec. So we'll just go ahead and do end. And we have that. Now, of course, we need to define this function of form spec wrapper. So we will go ahead and just throw that right here. And to do that, we will do a local function. I suppose you could also do a global function depending on how you had the structure of your code put together. But for our case, we're just going to do a local. Let me make this text a little bit bigger. There we go. That should be good. So we have our form spec wrapper. We need to pass the player name and the position because those are the 2 bits of data that we are sending to the function. So the function needs to do something with that data. Technically, it doesn't have to. You can send as much data you want to a function without actually doing anything with it. It's kind of stupid to do that, but it won't throw an error having it. Yeah. So we have the form spec wrapper. Now the form spec wrapper, you know, is actually not the form spec itself. It's calling another function which generates the form spec. So yeah, we're just going to go ahead and create that function right away. So we'll have another function, which will be local function, and this one will just call form spec. You know, not really super great names, but whatever. The form spec only needs the position. Do we need the player's name? No, because the wrapper is what is going to show the form spec. So the form spec doesn't actually need the player name in it. Does it? No, it doesn't. Okay. All the data would be existing in the position. In this case, we're actually going to just use, I don't even know what, nothing that's going to be stored in the position, though, most likely, because then that would require writing something to change data within the position, which is kind of a lot of work just to show how to do this. So we won't do that. We are going to need a form spec, of course, so we will go ahead with that and do local formspec equals, I just had to pull up a sample form spec to use here, so we're going to go ahead with formspec version. It could be whatever version you want. I'm just going to use 7 because that's what the sample is. We'll do the, that's not an ellipses because that would be 3 periods. I don't know what that's actually called. Is there a specific name for that? It's to merge them together into one line and just makes readability a little better. Give it a size. Size can be whatever. So we'll just go with 8 by 8, I suppose. Why not? And then all we really need is, well, we'll need a label to show something. That's probably helpful. And then of course we have to define the label, so we will start that with its position at 1 of 1, and then the text, which will just be, this is some text, because why not? And then let's go ahead and put, let's call that good for right now. So we have our form spec defined, and then we need to return the form spec, because otherwise we're not doing anything with the form spec. And then actually the form spec wrapper needs to display the form spec. So that is, in this case, as of right now, we don't have the form spec actually doing anything, but this should be everything we need to make this bit of the code work. So we end. So now we're going back to our wrapper function to display this form spec to the player. So the code for that, we're going to just do a little something like core.show form spec, player names who we're showing the form spec to. We need a string for the name of the form spec, so we will just call this, to use good naming convention, new mod test. I suppose we're not going to actually use that for anything, but convention does say you should have a name for it, because otherwise, actually I think if you set a form spec to an empty string, it replaces the player inventory. Don't quote me on that, but just use your mod name and then something. You can reuse the same one if you want. I guess it really doesn't matter. Anyway, we have a string for the name of the form spec, and then we need to actually provide the form spec, which is going to be our function called formspec with the variable of position. And then we just end the function. And evidently, forgot some punctuation. All right, let's hop back on over and see. Hey, we have a form spec and it says this is some text. So everything is working here. Swell. Now, of course, nothing's updating, nothing's changing, because we haven't written any of the code to do that yet. So let's go ahead and let's do that. So let's, I don't know. We need to create a local, we're just going to call it string equals, what would be a good value that we can just grab from the game? Time of day. How about that? Core.get time of day, I think. And then we will do the time is, and then we escape the quotes, 2 periods, string. I believe that's correct. We're just going to find out really quick here. The time is 0.54, okay. 0.54654,547. Okay, so that number is changing. I didn't realize that's how time was represented. So it must be about noonish. The sun is almost directly above us. Okay, well, the value changes. That's what we need. That's good. It's not quite exactly how I would have expected the time to be formatted, but that's fine. Doesn't matter. For this example, it changes. That's really all we need to do. It needs to change so we can see the changes happening. Okay, so now we're going to need a way to re-show this form spec to the player. So we'll do that with a little something like core.after. And this basically just uses a timer. In this case, we're going to go with a half second, and it calls a function at the end of that time. And in this case, the function that we're calling, I'm going to indent it just for readability. We're going to be calling the function of formspec with, of course, the position being passed to it. And then we do need to close out the core after with an end, and everything should be updated there. Swellmas, let's go. Let's see if this works. Is this changing every half second? I don't see anything changing at all. We're looking at 0.55068. Hasn't changed yet. 0.5547. Interesting. All right, what have we done wrong here then? We're showing the form spec core after half a second. We're calling the function. Oh, because we only call it once. So we actually want to call itself. That actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah, no doubt it needs to call itself. Because otherwise it's updating the form spec once and then nothing more. So then, of course, we're going to need to pass the player name again, because we need the function to call itself, and that way every half second it'll call itself again and resend the form spec. See if that is correct. No, here we go. So every half second we can see this number changing, and we can see the time of day slowly crawling away in front of our eyes. However, we have a problem. We can't make this go away. You know, click outside of the form spec, hit escape, it keeps coming back. It's kind of a problem, and it gets to the point where if you pull up the exit game screen here, there we go. You really only have the option to exit to the menu. Not good. We don't want that. We want to be able to not have the form spec updating. So what we're going to need to do here is store a value in the player, or in whatever. We just need to store a value in a global table, in the player, in the node, whatever, that lets us know if we should be updating the form spec. So in order to do that, I'm just going to use a global table. So we will go ahead and create a global table up here for new mod, because that's the name of this mod. There we go. Now we have a global table that we can store values into. So what we're going to do before this form spec wrapper here in the on right click, we are going to store a value. And in this case, it's going to be new mod dot, and we're creating a table within the table essentially. And we're just going to call it refresh, because that's what it is. You can do form spec refresh. You can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. And then we're going to use player name as the key, and we are going to say that equals true. So essentially we'll have a table value of true telling the form spec to re-update. But in order for that to happen, we actually, we need to check what that value is. So in order to do that, we will just do local refresh equals new mod refresh. That is the wrong. We want this player name. Okay, so that will either return a value of true or a value of false, which we have not set the value to be false anywhere yet. So we'll still need to do that. And then now that we have that, we can just use a simple if refresh, then go ahead and execute this code and then end. So perfect. We now have only if we're supposed to be refreshing will we actually be updating, and we do now need a way to have the refreshing not refresh essentially, because let's say, yep, if we go back, we will see, oh, well, evidently there's a typo. Attempt to index field refresh a nil value. Really? Most interesting. Mod refresh, player name equals true. New mod refresh. Okay. Oh, of course, because I need to... Silly of me to forget that. I need to manually create that table. There we go. Now, bada boom, bada bing. It still updates, and we're still stuck in this. Not optimal. So let's make that not be the case. Now there's two ways to do this. We can go ahead. I shouldn't say there's two ways to do this because that's not actually true. You do need to do both ways. No, that's not true either. You can do both ways. I believe it's called button exit. And then that's going to need a location defined. So we'll do 4, 3. And then we need a size. We'll do 3, 1. And then we need some text. And we'll just say exit. Right, yeah, that looks good. So now we have an exit button. Okay, so to handle the button, we need to use core.register on player receive I before E except after C, kids. Fields function player form name, that's where the string we used earlier comes in, and fields. Okay, and then we go ahead, I'll just throw the end in there right away to make the little error there go away. And then we're going to do if form name equals, and we are looking at the form name we used previously, so that's going to be new mod test. Then, and this pretty much is just telling the code, hey, only run this code if it's this specific form spec. So if you have a bunch of form specs that are doing, essentially the same thing, and you just need to pretty much have a button that you can click to make the form spec go away and make it not keep updating, you could use the same form name for all of them, as long as there's never anything different that any of those forms could be returning. So if that form, then let's check the field. So that's just going to be if fields button exit actually gets a string of itself, and then there's the forward facing, come to think of it. So if fields exit, I hope I have that set in the right order. I don't know. Then, so now this function or this code is only going to run if we click to the exit button within the new mod test form spec, and if all those things are true, then we're going to need the player name. So we'll go ahead with local, let's do local player name just to keep everything, standardized here. And that's going to be player get player name. I feel like that's correct. And then we're just going to basically set the refresh to false. So new mod refresh with the variable of player name now equals false. False. There we go. And then the button exit already exits the form spec, so we really don't have to do this. But if for some reason you were using a button that wasn't button exit, I don't know why you would do that. You would just call core close underscore form spec within player name, so it knows who to close the form spec for, and the name of the form spec, which would be new mod test. But because we are using a button exit, that will already close the form spec, so this form spec will actually be closed before this code even runs. Shouldn't cause any errors though. And then we just end out of those. Go ahead and save it, and let's see if I remembered my button placement. Okay, we have an exit button with the capital exit, so that's good. Time is updating. We click exit. Clearly there's a mistake. Oh no, wait, see, so here we see something. So that's interesting. We have to exit twice. So the function, the wrapper is running, right? And it keeps updating, and we click exit. And the code still's running one more time, which it really shouldn't be. So what's going on there? And you know what? I don't know, because that all looks correct to me. On right click, we're setting refresh to true, and then we're calling the wrapper. Oh, I see exactly what the problem is. Huge, huge, blind, right in your face. Here's the problem. We're calling core show form spec before we're checking if refresh is valid. Rookie move. So let's just go ahead and remove this line, because you know that's not where we want it. And let's throw it here underneath the if refresh. And that way this code will only execute and show the form spec when it should be. Hey, look at that. How simple of a fix. Okay, so everything seems to be going right, correct? Like this looks good. Oh, but wait. If we try to close with the escape key, it doesn't work. If we click outside of the window, it doesn't work. I mean, for a second it does, but it only actually stays closed when we click the exit button. Probably not what you want. That's poor design. So, what's the workaround? Well, there exists this one little thing, and we'll actually put it in the same bit here. So we have the if form name, right? All this stuff, all this good stuff. You don't actually need any of that. I mean, we do need it for the button, but to handle it, the clicking or hitting the escape key, it's actually as simple as just doing if fields quit. If fields quit. And then we're just going to make the refresh be false. New mod refresh. Throw our table value in with player name. We are going to have to change a little something here. Equals false. Because player name as a variable does not exist to us here. So we're just going to pull it from right here. And we're going to pop it right here. Now, there's pros and cons, I suppose one could say. And let me just jump into the smidge here. So, core register on player receive fields. If you put local player name before the form name, this is going to be called every single time somebody does a form spec interaction, whether or not any of the code below it is getting called or not. So I don't know how many microseconds this adds to your, code execution time, but it is going to be pulling a player name from the player object every single time anybody interacts with a form spec that would be sending a receive fields thing, whatever it would be called. So normally speaking, I do put them within the form name check, just because then this code is only running in this case. But because I have two things here and I don't feel like pasting it into this one and into if fields quit get the player name, we're just going to put it up here. But normally speaking, I would be putting that inside of the if form name equals, so I'm just not calling it with every single different one. I don't know if there's any kind of optimization to cancel that out. I don't really know how it works on the back end. But yeah, this should be everything we need now. So let's go ahead and give her another shot. All right, time's updating. We click outside of the box. Very nice. We hit the escape key. Very nice. We hit the exit button. Very nice. All right, it works great. Now there is one kind of really super huge thing to know about this. User input. Yeah, this won't work with anything that has user input. So if you have a text box, I don't even know a text area. I believe I don't know. We're going to go with... I'm trying to think what would this be? So we would want this at 1, 2, whoops, 1, 2 for the location. The size will go 4, 1. I don't know how many of these to put in. Is that right? I feel like that might be right. Basically, this is just to show that a text area does not work. Okay, so you can see I can type, but every half second when the form spec is updated, the text I entered is thrown out. Which, isn't great. So if you're using this method to update a form spec and you have a way for players to input data through a text field, buttons will work. Obviously, the exit button works. Any other button will work. But if there's text that a player can enter, even if it was, trying to paste it in, whatever data they could put into this window before it updates is just thrown out. The current system that we have isn't great. Now, a workaround for this would be to have like a toggle thing to toggle updating. Maybe, like the little refresh icon that you could toggle in the corner. And so when it's turned on, it will update. And when you turn it off, you can put stuff into text boxes. That really is not great for the user, but it would be one way to make it work. And otherwise, yeah, you pretty much just can't update it if you have a box that players can enter data into, or you would have to put like an edit button. So have a text field with this text static and then put an edit button. And so then when they go to edit, it pulls them up to a new form spec where they could change the text and it's not auto refreshing. And then when they save it, it would take them back to this screen where the text is, or whatever's refreshing is auto refreshing and their text is now in an uneditable box. Yeah, because that's just, editing text doesn't really work when you're force updating form specs. So that's just the one caveat to know about. Other than that, yeah, it's pretty simple. Not too much to it. And I think that's going to wrap this up. So yeah, quick overview. You just need to have, in the way I'm storing it here, a table in your mod and then a table within the table to store the player name and true or false value. You could use any value you want, of course, but true and false just kind of makes the most sense. Then, of course, you're going to need a node with the form spec or some way to display the form spec, chat command, whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to be a node. But wherever you're doing that, you need to store your player and the value in a table before you call the wrapper, as we're using in this case. And then the form spec wrapper checks the value of the refresh that we just set right here. And if the value is true, which is essentially what if refresh does, it's shorthand for if refresh equals true. Then we show the form spec. Don't show the form spec beforehand, because when you exit, it'll show it once more, which is kind of not what you want. And then core after, you could set this to any value you want. Depending on how frequently your information updates, you could go to like after 2 seconds, and you could go down to 0.1 second. You could really set it to anything you want. The more often the smaller this number is, the more often it's updating, which, depending on what is all updating, that's all being redrawn on the screen, could potentially lag older devices or, put a lot of extra bandwidth through, depending on, again, what you're updating. And then we call the actual form spec here, and in the after we're calling the wrapper. And that's important, because if we call the form spec like I did initially, it'll show the form spec, but this form spec doesn't say anything about updating. So you call itself in the after, and then show the actual form spec before the after, but both after you check the refresh. That was really way too wordy. And then, of course, you have the form spec itself. Now, the data here, we are just using the time of day. But because we are passing the position, we could do a simple local meta equals core get meta. I think that's actually I think it's, yeah, that's what it is. So now we could, with that, we could pull anything from metadata of the node. So whatever you're storing in the node's metadata, we could pull and use that values here instead of obviously the time of day. And you could pass other information to this. We have the player name right here. So any data stored in the player name, well, it wouldn't be stored in the player name other than the player name itself, but the player object you can get from the player name. So you could be storing data within the player object and pull that data out and update it into here as well. Or you could even pull things from tables. You know, you could pull a table that shows every single player that's currently viewing a form spec by just looking at new mod refresh and every listing in that table with a value of true. You could show that into a form spec. I don't know why you would want to do that, but you could. It's an option. It would work. I'm just saying you could use this to do lots of things. Thanks for watching. Tune in next week for another video, and I will see you then.